Jim Morrison is buried in Paris, in the most visited cemetery in the world. The story told of his family runs back across an ocean in 2 centuries, to the Isle of Lewis at the top of Scotland's Outer Hebrides, and to the clan that kept the island's law, the hereditary judges. That is the claim. It has never been proven. So this film does the one thing family history rarely survives. It checks the true story of the judges first. Then Jim Morrison's actual paper trail walked back generation by generation to see exactly how far it goes. Here is what this film covers, in order. First, the true story of the judges of Lewis, the office they held, the law they kept, and the betrayal that ended it. Then, and only then, we walk Jim Morrison's own paper trail backward, one generation at a time, from that grave in Paris towards Scotland, naming exactly what kind of evidence each step rests on. By the end, you will know exactly where the legend holds up and exactly where it breaks. Fair warning, the ending is not where you think. If you're watching this with a Morrison anywhere in your own family, drop the surname in the comments below. There's a fair chance we are already looking at it. At the northern tip of Lewis, in a district called Ness, one family were the judges. Hereditary judges, the Bray Hev, seated at Habost in a house remembered as in Tye Moor, the big house. When a dispute needed settling here, it did not have to go to a Scottish court. It could come to a Morrison. One thing before we go deeper. This story is full of Gaelic names and we have done our best to say them properly. It was not easy. If your Gaelic is better than ours, and on Lewis it certainly is, correct us in the comments. We would rather be corrected than be wrong. What a brieve did was not quite what judge means on the mainland. The law he kept was the old customary law of the Gaelic world, where compensation counted for as much as punishment, and where a judgment held because both sides chose to submit to it, not because an army stood behind it. The Morrisons did not rule Lewis. The MacLeods did as chiefs, and the brieve worked within that chiefdom as its judicial officer. Some later accounts run the brieves writ from Cape Wrath all the way to the Mull of Kintyre. The historian Thomas, writing in 1878, calls that an exaggeration. The record securely places the office on Lewis itself. The first brieve named in the surviving record is Hugh Chun Morrison. On the 23rd of July 1551, a messenger was paid to summon him and MacLeod with him to appear before the regent at Inverness. The entry does not say why. Hold on to that name. What Hugh Chun said on his deathbed years later would help bring down this office and the island's ruling family with it. We will get there. And before the record begins at all, there is the legend, and the clan does not agree with itself. The popular version says it began with a shipwreck. An infant son of Olaf the Black, Norse king of Man in the Isles, washed ashore near Ness on driftwood after his parents' marriage was annulled. It is a good story. The clan's own society calls it somewhat romanticised. The earliest written version says less. A Lewis writer working around 1680 recorded only that the founder was a natural son of one of the kings of Norway, adding that every Morrison in Scotland could claim descent from him. There is no shipwreck here, and no driftwood, and Thomas himself, searching the archives further, believed neither story. His reading names Cain MacVoorich, a MacDonald of Ardnamurchan, who married into the family around 1346 and, in his words, passed himself off for a Morrison. 3 different tellings, 3 different men, and no record that confirms any of them. A few miles from Habost, on the northeast coast of Ness, a spur of rock called Dún Aisjan sits cut off from the mainland by a ravine 10 to 15 metres across. Tradition, already being written down in the 1800s, said this was the Morrison stronghold, the refuge the family held during the worst of the island's feuding. For a long time that tradition was all there was. Then archaeologists went looking. A trial excavation in 2001 uncovered something nobody expected to have survived on a stack this exposed to the Atlantic. A massive, carefully built wall interpreted as the base of a tower, with sherds of a German stoneware wine bottle beside it. A rescue dig the following year turned up a musket ball, local and student volunteers joined the later seasons, processing the finds in Ness itself, and when the project's results were made public in December of 2015, they included something rarer, some of the earliest known gunflints in Britain, with evidence they had been made on the site. The archaeology did not prove the origin legends. Those stay unproven. But it did something that matters more for what comes next in this film. A tradition carried in Ness for generations turned out to have stone under it, exactly where the story said it would be. Checking a legend is not an insult to the people who told it. It is the only real tribute available. Some legends do not survive the checking. This one did. Keep that in mind, because the next legend this film checks is a much harder one, and it has to be tested in documents, not dug out of the ground. The wine was the trap. In 1597, a captured Dutch trading ship lay at Stornoway with her cargo of wine still aboard. The island's own hereditary judge, Breve John Morrison, invited the young chief of Lewis to come and drink it. To understand why, go back one generation. On his deathbed, old Huchon confessed that he, not the MacLeod chief, was the true father of Torquil Conanac, the boy the chief had already cast off. A priest's account of that confession was formally recorded in 1566. The succession of Lewis split in two. Torquil Conanac, backed by the Mackenzies against Torquil Dhu, the son preferred in his place. Now the wine ship makes sense. Torquil Dhu MacLeod, who then held Lewis as its young chief, came aboard at Stornoway with his companions. By Thomas's account, every one of them was seized. Torquil Dhu was carried to Ullapool and beheaded on Kenneth Mackenzie of Kintail's order in July 1597. The Breve did not enjoy his triumph long. MacLeod loyalists hunted him down and killed him at Inverkirk Eig in Assynt, even though he had the larger party. Tradition holds that his companions, carrying the body home by sea, were forced by weather to stop at a small island, where they opened the corpse to slow its decay before sailing on. The island still carries the name Eilan a Bhrí Haibh, the Breves Island. Later tradition places his burial at Ness. The killing weakened both families, and Edinburgh moved in. The MacLeods could not produce title deeds. Torquil Conanac had already handed the paperwork to Mackenzie of Kintail. The Crown forfeited Lewis and granted it to a company of lowland colonists, the Fife Adventurers, who failed in 3 attempts from 1598 to 1602, 1605 to 1607, and again in 1609. On the 20th of July 1610, they sold their claim to Kenneth Mackenzie for 10,000 merks. MacLeod political resistance ended in 1613, when Neil MacLeod, the last holdout, was hanged at Edinburgh's Market Cross. The Breve ship has no equally tidy end date. The last trace Thomas could find in the paper record is a commission of fire and sword dated the 24th of June, 1630, which still calls one Donald Mac Indowie a Breve. Nothing in that entry proves a working court still sat behind the title. Somewhere in that gap, the office simply stopped mattering. What was left of the Morrisons scattered into Harris and into Durness in Sutherland, where kin of their name already held land. Tradition says an earlier Morrison had married into the Bishop of Caithness's family and been given that parish as dowry, bringing 60 families north with him. The same story is told of another clan entirely, the Mackays, about the same stretch of coast, which tells you what kind of story it is. Others drifted back to Ness once the Mackenzies were secure. Morrison families would, in time, cross the Atlantic too. Whether Jim Morrison's line was one of the Hebridean branches is exactly the question the documents now have to answer. From here, every step is a document, until suddenly it isn't. Watch for the exact moment the ground changes. James Douglas Morrison, born the 8th of December 1943 in Melbourne, Florida. Died the 3rd of July 1971, buried here in the cemetery of Père Lachaise, Paris. One grave. Now we walk backward, one generation at a time. His father, George Stephen Morrison, known as Steve, born the 7th of January 1919 in Rome, Georgia. A career naval officer, eventually a rear admiral. The link from Jim to his father is a published obituary, naming him as the father of the late rock icon Jim Morrison. That is about as solid as a document gets. Keep walking. Steve's father, Paul Raymond Morrison, born the 28th of April 1886 in Georgia. This link is a census page, 2 of them. The 1920 count places 1-year-old Stephen in the household of Paul R. and Carolyn Morrison in Alabama. The 1930 count places him at 11 in Paul's household in Florida. Named, dated on the record. Strong ground. Paul's father, Robert Bruce Morrison, born the 6th of July 1852, died the 2nd of June 1899. Buried at Myrtle Hill Cemetery, Rome, Georgia. Here is the family joke, and it turns out to be a real one. The family used to joke about being descended from Robert the Bruce. Nobody meant it literally, but there he is anyway, a Robert Bruce Morrison, sitting right in the middle of the actual paper trail, put there by nothing more romantic than his own parents' choice of name. And feel the ground shift as we step to him. This link is a compiled genealogy citing Paul's death certificate, but the certificate itself has never been shown. Robert and his wife Susanna are documented people. The link to them is provisional. Softer ground. The first give in the trail. Robert's reported father, Stephen Morrison, born in Pennsylvania in 1826, probably in Butler County, though sources disagree on the exact date. Stephen himself is real. A local paper, the Lawrence Journal, printed a notice on the 9th of March 1867, naming Stephen Morrison of Neshannock, the former county superintendent, dead suddenly 3 days earlier. That is all the notice says. It does not name his parents, and the link from Robert back to Stephen rests on derivative family trees, copied from one another. Trees agreeing with each other is not the same as evidence. Weak ground now. Stephen's father is reported, William Morrison, born in Hagerstown, Maryland in 1781, married there to Sarah Slemons. Those details come from modern compiled research and a user-submitted pedigree file, unproved. That is the honest word for it. And William's father, it is said, Alexander Morrison, born on the Isle of Lewis around 1750, arrived in America in 1781, settled near Hagerstown. Here is the entire weight resting on that claim. One entry, submitted by an unnamed member of the public, to a genealogy file that anyone can upload to and no one has to verify. No supporting parish register, passenger list, or will surface anywhere in this research. No name of a mother, a township, a parish on Lewis at all. The paper stops here. What would close that gap? More than one lucky find. A baptism on Lewis with the right name proves nothing by itself. Alexander Morrison's were not rare. It would take a connected chain, a Lewis record that ties one particular man to his leaving, a record of the crossing, and a Maryland record that ties that same man to William. Made at the time by people who knew him. No such chain has surfaced, and even a chain to Lewis would not finish the job because the surname itself is not the bloodline. Consider what the clan's own record keepers admit. In 1967, the Lord Lion, Scotland's heraldic authority, recognised a modern chief of Clan Morrison. Even he could not document his own descent from the hereditary brieves. The clan's own DNA project has since tested the wider name and found several genetically unrelated Morrison families, all carrying the same surname today. And on Lewis itself, researchers at UIG are using DNA to test a tradition that some families named Smith were once Morrisons of the Brieve line, and they note that a verified male line descendant of the Brieves would still be needed as the reference. The judge's own bloodline is, right now, a question even on Lewis. The name is not the line. Jim's brother Andy is remembered saying it plainly. I think my ancestors were from the Outer Hebrides in the north of Scotland, or somewhere like that. That's tradition, a direction to look, not a destination reached. We cannot prove the line. And that is exactly, honestly, where it ends. So we end where the claim began. This cliff, not a grave in Paris. Whatever the truth of one rock star's family tree, the wider question stays open, and it is genuinely open to you. If you carry this name, or one of its old spellings, you may hold evidence that helps close this gap. A family Bible, a letter, a grandparent's story nobody ever wrote down. Tell us. Drop your surname and what your own family always said about where it came from in the comments below. And if you want the documented origins and the major branches of Morrison and its spellings, the full surname report is waiting on our website.